Hi Stephanie, it's Katelyn. I hope you're having a great weekend, and I'm really excited to talk about these pictures. Um, let's start, excuse me, I have a little bit of a cold. Let's start by looking at this one. So, the reason I think this drives you crazy is she's not well lit at all, and she's beautiful, her dress is beautiful, it's a beautiful setting, but I think light-wise, she's just a little too far underneath this tree, or at least just turned at the wrong angle. So if you can see all this beautiful light that's hitting her right here, if you had been shooting from over here, instead of having her face shooting this way and having her face towards turned away from the light, you would have noticed a really big difference, because if her face was just turned just a little bit more to her left, she would have all this light coming across her face, and you would have a really well lit image. And so I think, I mean, if you look at it here, if you just look at that part of the image, that's a really well lit image. And then you get to her face, and it's like, oh, her face is really dark, and it's driving me crazy. So that's what's driving you crazy, I think, is that the light just isn't even. Her body looks very well lit. Her bouquet, her arm, her chest, I think it's beautiful, but her face is turned away from the light. And so, I can see why you would be frustrated. So it looks like, looking at the ground around here, that the light was really coming from this direction. So I would have just moved your body, instead of shooting right here, if you shot her from right here, this way, then if she was looking out, there would be more light on her face. I think that would have fixed the problem. So, also, I would take your ISO down because, well, maybe not. So you're shooting at 1 point, so it must have been pretty dark when you're shooting this image, because you're shooting at 1.4, 1/80th of a second at maybe even take your ISO up a little bit depending on what lens you're using. So I would stay at 80 would be the lowest I would go with your shutter with a 50mm lens without a tripod. So your settings are fine, actually. I would just play around with them in the future. If depending on what camera body you're shooting with, ISO is not going to cause that much grain if you go up to 1600. If you're with an older camera body, if that's what you're using, then ISO at 1000 is probably, you're starting to see a little bit of grain in post-processing. But I really think you did a great job here. It's just a matter of posing and, where her light was situated. I learned from someone a long time ago, have the bride's body, her torso, turned away from the light, and then have her body turned back, or sorry, okay, let me start over. Take the body and turn it away from the main light source, and then take their head and the shoulders and have them turn and look towards the light. So basically, her stomach would be facing this way, and she would be twisting and looking that way, so that her face is well lit, but she has nice shadows on her stomach. So let me try to find you an example of this really quick, just so I can show you what I'm talking about. Here we go. Don't mind my desktop or anything. So let's look at a wedding I did recently. I should have some examples here, I think. If I don't, then okay, here's a good example. So I turned her body away from the light and had her face look back towards it. So what happens in that situation, you're creating shadows and really great detail on the body, but their face is still well lit. If I was shooting and her face was looking that way, I'd have a really well lit dress and not a well lit face. So I kind of think that's what's happening here. Her body is somewhat well lit, but her face is turning away from the light, and so that's where the problem is. So I hope that was helpful. As far as fixing this image, I really think maybe it'd be beneficial just to, I'm actually going to take the saturation down a little bit. If you brightened up just her face, it'd make it a little more even. I'd love to see the straight out of camera image of this. You don't have to upload it, but I think there would be some things we could do before post-processing to make it a little bit better. So I love it. I think it's beautiful. It's just a matter of lighting. So don't be too hard on yourself. It's still a beautiful image, but that's something we can work on in the future. So let's look here. This is beautiful. The light's gorgeous. The highlights are really pretty. I agree with you. I think seeing her face would have perfected the image, just because when you can't see people's faces, it really takes away that emotional connection when you look at it. Because right now I have no clue what she even looks like. I have no clue if she's happy, anything like that. So what she could have done was pull her hair back, and also just you could change your angle just a little bit, so you have a little bit more of their profiles. It might mean that you'd have to stand up kind of on the fence, which I've had to do before, but it's really beautiful. I really like it. So, as far as editing goes, I'm not really sure what your style is or what you're going for. So if you want it to be a little bit hazy, you can keep it as it is. If you want it to pop a little bit more, I would overexpose just a little bit. And that's a little bit of a pop for you. So I also lighten up the darks and then darken the shadows. So let's take a look at the difference there. We'll reset this one. So it could be that you like the way you edited this and you don't want any type of help with that, and that's fine, because it's still a beautiful image. I'd be happy with that if I printed that and put it on my wall. If you want a little bit more pop, you could edit like I just showed you. So as far as settings for this, I think they're great. 1.8 obviously worked really well, and they're in focus, and the horse looks great. So I wouldn't change anything about the way you shot it except for seeing her profile. And sometimes when you're working with a fence, you can create really cool compositions, and maybe you did. You just didn't show that part of the image, but or that part of the shoot. But you can use the fence instead of making the line come straight this way. If you shot an angle and the line of the fence went like this, it would direct your eyes right to the subject. So sometimes it's great to really take advantage of the lines that fences create when you're shooting in farms or parks or anything with great lines like that. So anyway, that's just a little tidbit of information. Let's talk about this one, because you're right. There's some overexposedness going on, and that's okay. I think it's great that you notice that. So if I was editing this, I'd take the exposure down, so whenever you lose detail, that's when you know something's overexposed. So we lost detail on his neck, his head, her face, her shirt. So I'd take it back down to where you can actually see detail in those areas. I think that's properly exposed, just like that. But if you think it's too dark, I would up the fill light instead of making the whole image brighter. So there's a big difference there, because when you adjust exposure, it's adjusting the brights. Okay, it's adjusting the overall brightness. So I would take that down and then make it brighter just with the fill light. You could also make it brighter by lightening the darks. All right, and then adjust the highlights a little bit. Now for me, I don't do sepia tones, but if you do, that's awesome. If you do sepia tones, I would say stick with them, and do all of your pictures, all of your black and whites with a little bit of a brown tone to them, just for consistency's sake, because you want people to see your black and whites and think, oh, I know who shot that. You want people to recognize your work, so just be consistent with how you edit these. The sign in the background actually doesn't bother me at all, but I know you said it bothered you a little bit, so you could always crop it in, but I don't think it's that big of a deal. I mean, I guess that's a little less distracting, but I think the main thing here is just toning down the exposure, because that's a great image. It still looks beautiful. Let's compare. All right. So that's what I edited. And if you think, oh, that doesn't pop enough, there are things you can do to make it pop a little bit more. But it's just a more even image. It looks like with the sepia tone, you're going for a little bit of a vintage look. And so when you take down the highlights a little bit, like I did, like this image, this is why it looks a little bit dull. It's because I took down the highlights. If you wanted it to pop a little bit more, you could add a little bit more contrast and darken the shadows a little bit. But I think it's beautiful. It's really just this area was messed up a little, just because of exposure issues. So hope this was helpful. And if you have any questions about editing, just make sure you maybe send a before and after if you have them, just so I can walk you through the process. But again, beautiful images. This one's great. I really think it's just a lighting issue. Whenever you shoot and you're editing and you're like, I just can't make this look right, more than likely it's not a camera issue. It's more of just how you handled your light. So, and that's exactly what happened in this case. So, not enough light on her face, but everything else looks beautiful. Her dress looks beautiful. So you should be proud of yourself. I liked these images you picked, and I'm excited to see next week's. Have a great weekend. Bye.